Do I get started? Sure. Hi, everyone. Um, okay, so part of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about the models and the studies that we do, as well as some of the platforms that we use. Uh, kind of, I think the big value is the discussion. So I'm going to try and rush through this. Hopefully, not rush through it so that there's no discussion points, but hopefully rush through it so that we can get through as much as we can and have fruitful discussions afterwards. So I'm going to first start by saying, what is our role in modeling power systems? And when we talk about modeling power systems, I like to think of it as we're solving problems. What I mean by that is it's easy as a researcher to be investigative of what could we extract from this? What could we learn from this? What if we did this? What if we did different case studies? But our role in these projects isn't to investigate what we could learn from it as much as it is to solving problems. So our roles on a lot of power system impact studies or different projects are we work with the community, we work with the utility, and we are given the directive of what are the challenges that are being faced to ensure that there is a responsible integration of renewables, a responsible microgrid project, making sure we address the crux of the situation. But we are also a transparent, unbiased research group. So if a utility has a concern and consideration of integrating renewables, we add that into our studies, make sure it meets their level of rigor so that it is accepted, share that information with both parties equally. We don't necessarily replace a consultant because we don't stamp off on things. We're a higher education institution, but we can provide a third-party analysis of what the integration of renewables are. And we do that assessment, give that information so that the project proponents, and as Greg mentioned, that could be the utility, that could be the community, or a bit of both because it's a partnership, can make better informed decisions. So in a lot of ways, we don't look at what can be done. We don't look at the economics. We don't look at anything. We understand here are our concerns for reliability. Here's our concerns for the voltage profile in the system. Here are our concerns over what are the sales of electricity in terms of the amount that is being produced and utilized by the grid. We incorporate that into our studies to solve a problem. So I'm going to be talking about data in a bit, but when we look at that through that lens, I don't want to look at it as what models do you use? Okay, here's a list of models that you use because the models or what simulation platform you use, because those are solutions. We use the best solution for the problem at hand. What I mean by that is, let's just say we were to do a load flow analysis. So basically a snapshot of what is the voltage profile throughout the system, the power flow, and a snapshot if let's just say the solar is producing X amount and the load is Y amount. We look at the data not as what data do you have available? Okay, we'll work with it, or a predetermined 1 hour load profile. 1 hour load profile might not give sufficient information to look at the intermittency in between. Hour by hour, the wind could vary significantly. And even with hour by hour, the cloud coverage might vary significantly. We also don't look at necessarily the, say, nanosecond by nanosecond, because the system might not change that drastically nanosecond, so that if you actually model it at that detail or that level, you might just add more complexity without getting more information. And also at that level, you might just add in more assumptions unnecessarily that might not give you better accuracy in your results. But you also have to consider, say, for example, at say a 1 minute or 1 hour level, if you're looking at it as you're modeling a race car, and your, I don't know, let's just say Toyota Prius, they would operate the exact same thing if you look at it on an hour by hour level, where, say, for example, it stopped at a stoplight at the first hour, so it's 0 kilometers an hour. After an hour, you're at highway speeds. Okay, it looks the same in performance. So making sure that the data are sufficiently detailed to answer the question or to solve the problem that you're trying to solve, identifying the models that you use to specifically solve the problem. So it's problem driven, not solution driven. Let's see what insights we have. These are just a list of projects that we've worked on. We've worked with many different First Nation and Inuit communities, as well as various utilities across the territories and in BC. Some of these projects are solar battery, wind battery. Some projects are investigative in terms of we don't know what we want, but what are some, say, community energy plan initiatives? Some projects, let's just say the Fort Providence Kikisa is line energization, where they wanted to connect Fort Prov and Kikisa to the southern grid in NWT. So energization how will it affect system stability reliability? In Wati, Northwest Territories Power Corp was looking at relocating the diesel plant outside of the community and how will that affect the voltage profile in the system, as well as what diesel generator sizes would be most conducive for accepting renewables in the future. So there's every single one of these projects have something different to it, and we're learning as we go along. So we don't want to come up with a solution and then say, this is what we do. We want to make sure that we identify what the problem is, what the crux is, what are the challenges faced by the local problem. And just because it's in the same jurisdiction doesn't mean it's the same problem. And every project that we have, we add more functionality to our solution set. So when we work with a new project, we could say, this is what we have done in the past. What would you like us to do? And oftentimes we add more functionality. Oftentimes we take what we've done and apply it to the new problem. So what I present here will very likely be different than what I present 5 years from now. It's very different than what I would have presented 5 years ago. I'm happy to share these slides with everyone, so I'm not gonna go through everything, but this is kind of the gamut of the studies that we do. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to assess, like, can we, or given a system study, so we don't even design system studies. My background, I did my PhD in multi-objective optimization applied to microgrid control. I don't use that. I've never been asked to implement a microgrid controller. I'd love to, but I never have. What we do is we take the proposed project the proposed project, and then we do an assessment of how it affects system stability, reliability, and we do that through assessing system adequacy, system security, and system protection. And we do the necessary studies in order to validate how it does it. So our job is to de-risk these projects, to provide that information of, given what you have provided, here's the performance. And so if it doesn't meet the performance metrics of the utility or the community, at least they have a basis of information that they can make responsible decisions, and they could change their project and come back. I think one of the presentations was talking about how it's an iterative process. It is very much an iterative process. So the first thing that we do in order to do that is try to avoid the fallacy of garbage in, garbage out. We haven't been to any one of those communities where the utilities data are accurate and up to date and fully complete of what we need. So we go on site to make sure we go pole by pole. What is the equipment that we see there? What is the phasing that we see there? What is everything? And it has the added benefit of training our local team and even locals within the community. It's one thing to look at a recloser as a single line diagram, as a component in the single line diagram. It's another thing to look at it and say, that's what that piece of equipment is. It makes it more real and tangible. And it makes people, our team, realize kind of really that one-to-one of the practical implementation of how these systems work. As an added benefit of what we do is the data that we collect, we then share that back with the community utility so that they have a more updated information set of the system that's in place. So we use Civ3D, SIME, QGIS, MATLAB Simulink to collect the data. And we usually have two single line diagrams, if you will, of the system. One is GPS accurate, because that's what's more accessible for the community. And then one is an electrical single line diagram, because that's what the utility engineers are used to looking at. And we could do both, but this is part of our knowledge mobilization to make sure that the results are conveyed in the right manner. As far as modeling is concerned, we do the what we call quasi-static time series analysis, which is essentially a minute-by-minute analysis over a certain year, over 20 years, we look at the different aspects of what is the power flow in the system. So if the solar has a certain generation, the microgrid controller is saying the battery should charge at this time and then operate different ways. What is the voltage profile in the system at every single node? What is the power flow in the system at every single node? And when I say node, that's a specific pole. Every single one of these is like a specific pole on the system that is GPS accurate. So we can not only say, hey, there's a voltage deviation, you're going to have an over voltage in phase A at on the system, or sorry, you're not going to, sorry, we don't just say that you have a voltage deviation. We could say you have an over voltage of say 1.3 per unit at phase C at this exact pole to that level of detail. Now, Greg said all models are wrong, which is true. Some are useful. So we do have lots and lots of assumptions. But if we're transparent with our assumptions, one, we could be challenged on them, which is awesome. Because if we're challenged on our assumptions, then that means we could do better and have better results. Or if those assumptions change, we could then redo our analysis and make sure it's as accurate as possible. When we worked on the Kinggate project, when we were asking QEC for the data, for the load data, what they provided is, here's how much fuel was used this month. That's not really a load profile, but kind of saying, okay, well, we worked with Old Crow, let's ask Vantakwichan First Nation and Aqua Electric Yukon if we could use that profile as another proxy load profile in a community of similar size, then we'll scale it to the diesel consumption. These are all assumptions. It's the best we can do, but if better data become available, we could always use those afterwards. So for our power flow analysis, we look at the extreme examples. We use MATLAB, particularly MATLAB Simulink in the Simscape electrical power tools. We use state flow analysis to implement the microgrid controller, and we also use Simulink power systems for the electromagnetic transient analysis. The reason we use MATLAB is because we have a lot of flexibility into crafting our own models. So if there's an ability to implement a model we haven't seen, we could do so in MATLAB. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It can do almost anything, but it doesn't do anything particularly well. There isn't a customized solution that is best for it. But one of the challenges that we face with a lot of power system analysis is that it assumes a balanced system, which you cannot assume in an isolated grid. Even with, say, for example, low inertia systems, how that impacts everything, that is something that not all power system models use. So we started off with MATLAB Simulink and developed models where, say, for example, the Woodward governor model. We use DGov1 as our base model. You implement that with Woodward parameters to the best of our abilities. So we use standard power system models supplemented with real world data to the best of our abilities and assumptions, and then update them as need be to meet our needs. So we started with MATLAB Simulink, but is that the best tool? No. You'll never find a best tool, but we have trade-offs. Then we move to OpenDSS, because OpenDSS, we're a huge fan of open source software. Shout out to Anthony. Because we want to make sure, like, we're not in the business of hoarding IP, we're in the business of sharing IP. We're in the business of sharing, of training, and making sure that we're as transparent as possible. So we did OpenDSS, but OpenDSS has its limitations, so we couldn't move away from Simulink. So we use OpenDSS and Simulink, provide the source code for OpenDSS, so that way it could be recreated, but they could corroborate each other, because each problem and each solver has their different solvers and algorithms to solve for the problem. Then lately, we also have started to use SimDist, SIME, and we've also used ETAP, mostly because Aqua Electric Yukon uses SimDist and Quantic Energy Corporation uses ETAP. So as part of the deliverable, if we could provide a model of the system, an updated model of the system for the utility in a platform that they use, that helps them to advance their initiatives, as opposed to, I did this project in a different platform or software that you don't use, then it's just, at the end of the project, that is the end of the usefulness of that model. Now we can develop models and also cross-validate and corroborate with our other platforms that we've developed. And yeah, with the quasi-static time series, we also look at equipment loading. So I won't get into it too much right now, but even considering the dispatch protocols of the diesel generators and their efficiency curves could tell you how it operates with renewables and without renewables. And as a general rule, what we have found is when the diesels are operating grid forming mode, the diesel generators tend to operate less towards their peak efficiency and more towards their minimum loading constraint. But that's not always the case, because if it's controlled such that the battery system charges and accepts all the renewables that are being implemented. So for example, in Old Crow and Beaver Creek, that's how it's controlled. It doesn't have an impact on the diesel generator. So for example, with Greg, one question that we could get into later, but Aqua Yukon's approach is to minimize the risk. They're not taking it as a collective integrated system. They're treating it as a sandbox, where this is the sandbox of the new system, but we want to minimize risk. So if anything were to go wrong with the new system, they could always disconnect it and rely on something that has been working in the community for the past 50 years versus a system integration. There are pros and cons to both approaches, but if we model it appropriately and give the appropriate insights, we could show what the crux is of the situation, how the stability, reliability is impacted in the system, as well as what are the performance characteristics of every piece of equipment that's in the system. We do short circuit analysis also to see for the protection system, because the protection system was designed for generators that have rotating inertia and loads that aren't necessarily feeding back into the grid. And so the protection system isn't necessarily designed for what we're throwing at it. And protection is somewhat of an art, somewhat of a science. We don't do the protection design, but we could do the protection analysis of what is the line-to-line-to-line faults? What are the line-to-line-to-ground faults? What are the line-to-line fault, or yeah, line-to-line-to-line, line-to-line, line-to-ground, line-to-line-to-ground, line-to-line-to-line-to-ground, different faults? What are the fault magnitudes? And will the protection system operate as it should? As in, does it stay online when it should stay online? Does it disconnect when it's supposed to disconnect? One of the studies that we've added actually was the Beaver Creek Solar Project that added this project. The inrush current, let's just say, for example, in Beaver Creek, the system wasn't, what is it, I want to say something like 300 to 500 kilowatt load in Beaver Creek, and they're implementing a 1.5 MVA transformer in the system. The magnetization of the transformer will require some sort of inrush current that the system wasn't necessarily designed to accommodate. Will it cause nuisance tripping by magnetizing the transformer? I'm not going to get into this right now, but if you want to nerd out with me afterwards, I would love to talk about this study as well. And then finally, when we look at the minute-by-minute simulations of our load flows, we could say the diesel generator has this much up reserve, this much down reserve, here are the different characteristics. But then we go into more detail of the electromagnetic transient simulations, modeling the governor, modeling the automatic voltage regulator, modeling the PID controllers that are in the system. And if there's a contingency on the system, so say, for example, the sudden loss of the solar, the sudden loss or the sudden connection of the wind turbine, that's an acceptable event. Can the system remain stable if you do such a thing? That is an event that you might not be able to see on a minute-by-minute basis. So we look at it from a 50 microsecond simulation to shock the system and see if it remains stable under various conditions. So let's just say, for example, if the diesel is in grid forming mode or if the battery is in grid forming mode, what are the different characteristics and how will the system operate during these transient events? I'm just going to quickly go through some lessons learned. A lot of aspects is community partnerships. It's so critical to these. This isn't sandboxed thinking, let me just study this project and then it will work. We really need to understand, what does success look like for the community? What does success look like for the utility? What does success look like overall? What are the concerns? What are the considerations? Because as modelers, we are solving problems. Be committed to the problem, not the solution. If what we're doing right now, if our analysis isn't very useful, we shouldn't be doing it. So we need to make sure that we understand the problem and what the challenges are, and that comes with developing a relationship and fostering trust. If I were to go to Martha and say, "Hey Martha, what are your ambitions and fears?" If I was a perfect stranger, Martha's like, "Excuse me, who are you? Why are you asking me this question?" But for her to share that with me requires trust. And it requires trust from the community, because if I know what they value, I know what could hurt them. It requires trust from the utility. If the utility shares things that they're concerned about, if I was an investigative journalist, I can make them look bad. It requires trust. And it's so critical to identify what problem you're trying to solve. And that's something that we don't want to compromise, which goes into data. If you don't mind, I'll go on a little bit of a rant about data. So like I said, we've never gone into a community where we have all the data that we want and all the data that we need, even if all the data that are available are provided to us. How many people here are in the energy domain? How many people here have used a computer for the past 5 years? How many people here could give me the load profile of their computer? Why? Why can't we? You're in energy. You've been using it every single day. Sometimes the data aren't available because there wasn't a need to do so. And even collecting the data means it's added expense, added operations in order to have the data available. And that's not a fault of anybody other than it's just sometimes not available. Or I have data. I have what's important to the utility. I have, for Kulik Energy Corporation, I had the amount of fuel that was used the past month. That was useful for the utility. It's not useful for the resolution of what I'm trying to find out. But a lack of data is a real thing. But don't think of it as something as, how come you don't have the data? How come you're not sharing? Another aspect with data is recognizing that you could do harm through the studies that you're doing. What I mean by that is, look to the person to the left of you and look to the person to the right of you. In 2011, Inuit Tapir Kanatami released a research strategy on Inuit Nunangat, and they said for every 3 Inuit, there's a research paper about Inuit that doesn't actually benefit Inuit. So if you're doing studies on community members, you're perpetuating the statistic. Unless this is a research that is driven by the community, unless this is a research that advances community initiatives, you're perpetuating that statistic. Now, I'm not calling anybody a bad person here, but just recognizing the impact of that. And also, raise your hand if you're thrilled about Google and Meta and Apple collecting data about you. Who loves it that they're collecting data about you? Even though you signed that, yes, you can collect data about me. Who loves it that they're sharing your data with people without your consent? This is exactly what we're facing. I mean, I see Annie's online. Is she still online? Okay, she dropped out. But we were dealing with that, with this with Sophie as well. We have data on many different microgrids, but I feel like I'm hoarding the data when it's not necessarily my ambition. Like, it's not our data. It's the utilities and communities' data that we want to make sure that if we share the data, we have permission of the community, because it's data about the community and the utility, to know what it's going to be used for, how it's going to be used, because like I said before, we have to maintain that trust. And why it's important, if we have low data on a community, why does the community matter? The smaller the community, the more of an opportunity there is to identify behavior of the community. If I have your residential load profile of your house, I could tell when you're on vacation. I could tell if you have a 9-to-5 job. I could tell what your behaviors and patterns are. The smaller the community, the more information that you could extract from it. And I'm not saying that researchers are malicious, but if you do a study about a community without their permission that doesn't actually address their needs, you're perpetuating the statistic, and it could be damaging for the community. So I just want to be aware of data of, even if it were available, are we managing it, and are we using it in a responsible manner that actually advances the community's ambitions? And yeah, these are all different things of how remote isolated power systems need to be modeled from a technical perspective in a different manner than others, and having the assumption of, as Greg said, if you did a system impact study of the solar integration in Ontario, a large integrated grid, they're cousins, but it's a different beast integrating it into an isolated power system that needs to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, the results are not valid. What do I have here? Oh yeah, and these are all other aspects and considerations of integrating renewables. Yeah, and I'm not going to go too much into that because I just want to end off with, oftentimes the process is the product. Success is not just what you do, but how you do it. What I mean by that is, here on the image on the left is, we've done our results. We finished working with Wantagwitchin First Nation on paper in 2017. No, 2019 is when we stopped working with BGFM, when our contract expired. That was us last year working with the nation on building capacity within the community, teaching them how power systems work, because people aren't foolish for not knowing how power systems work. We specifically designed it to hide behind the walls, for the generation to be far away, for the system to work no matter what we throw at it. So when people don't understand how complex the power system is and what it takes to keep the lights on, people aren't foolish for not knowing that. It's just they don't have access to it. And so if community members have an opportunity or an idea to pursue, at least understand what the challenges are to pursue that, as well as build capacity to operate and maintain your local power system, or operate and maintain your local system, as well as your community's energy initiatives. The image on the right is actually Julian Russell. He works with Sambake First Nation. So when we were doing our system collection, and we did the same thing in Haida having locals join us for our system collection to be transparent. This is what we do. That's what this is. That's what that is. Just so that they have a better understanding and more excitement, as opposed to, that's just infrastructure, I don't really know what that is. Have a better understanding of what is in existence for their community. That's my presentation. Hopefully that's good. Yeah.
I have a question that kind of came up during Greg's talk, that I thought you might help answer it, and it's in the details. But I like what Greg said about modeling smaller time steps and actually understanding what's happening, and also you see a number like 99, 98%, the red flags that come up, and as a modeler who's dealing with power system models, and I'm tracking kilowatts and kilowatt hours in a system, I don't have any knowledge of what the actual voltage of the system is that I'm proposing. And I have been encouraged, and it's been incredibly valuable to model at smaller timescales and to ask, okay, open up the spreadsheet or narrow in on the timescales and say, what is this solution, not just on a yearly or 25-year model, what is it actually saying, but what's happening minute by minute, second by second, and is that actually possible? But I was wondering, which I encourage everyone modeling in the room to do that, like go down to the smallest time scale you can and ask if what you're proposing actually could work, or figure out if you don't know. But if I'm only tracking kilowatts, like what can I do what am I missing by not modeling at the voltage, or understanding the voltage, and then how could I learn about that or catch those kind of infeasibilities at this phase, or is that just something that doesn't happen until the next phase of the project? You model it.
Yeah, I think it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So for example, if you're modeling it as a kind of an alternative storage solution to see its characteristics versus lithium ion, for example, the characteristics of the grid, if you assume you replace one to the other, would probably be the same. If, let's just say, you're operating the electrolyzer as a constant power output, or if you're operating the lithium ion as a constant power output, the power flows on the system would be the same. So you'll never have a model that's 100% capturing of all realistic phenomena. So you have to make some assumptions, and some of those assumptions are useful. Like realistically, we don't go down to the quantum mechanics level, even though that's subject to everything, but it won't give us more accurate results. So the challenge that I find when dealing with the power grid is we're looking at the utility constraints. They need to make sure that they're operating at nominal voltage throughout the entire system. So whether you connect the generator at the end of the feeder or at the diesel plant bus, that will affect power flows, and that would affect the utility's ability to maintain the voltage consistent throughout the system at all times under all scenarios. So if you're looking at a system integration with the voltage profiles of, if the problem you're trying to solve is, does the electrolyzer create voltage imbalance in the system, then yes, go down to that level, because that's the problem that you're trying to solve. If it's more along the lines of seasonal storage or anything like that, you might not even need to go to the nanosecond type of time scale. So just make sure that the solution that you have is addressing the problem. So there's a reason why a lot of carpenters have multiple tools, is that a hammer won't solve all your problems. So just making sure that you're addressing it. So I think going hour by hour, if you're solving seasonality aspects, might be sufficient. If you're going for power balance in terms of managing the fluctuations of renewables, so say, for example, if you're managing the fluctuations of wind, if the inertia of the wind turbine has a time constant of 3 seconds, you might not need to go down to nanoseconds. Microseconds might be sufficient, and you might say that minute by minute might be insufficient because it blends in the actual problems and the resolution there. So I'm not quite answering your question as what you should be doing, but more along the lines of rationalizing the choice for the models and the time step for the solution and the phenomena that you're trying to solve and identify.
How do you use the hyperparameter optimization to cover these smart fluctuation?
Sorry, say that again.
Hyperparameter optimization, which is it is machine learning, but it would predict what sort of fluctuation or inertia does it coming off, and it adjusts itself before they start coming off. So it avoids the inertia in the especially in the rate forming and the behavior in the microgrid. So I have read a study about it from Royal Holloway University from UK, where they have done a study. It's not my piece, so I haven't studied in depth about it, but it was really good for renewable energy microgrid to avoid those fluctuations, sudden drop off or the frequency goes off because it's not hidden, which could have a lot of energy.
Yeah, so I haven't studied that. I'd be interested to learning more about that, but part of the reason why we haven't studied that is our role isn't to design a system, it's to study the impacts of a system that is being proposed.
They also, in the conclusion, they also implemented it in practical, and with learning the system, like it's learning the behavior of the community. So it's sometimes more accurate. It's being trained and the fault is not occurring, and if the fault occurs in the practical scenarios, it avoids it and it saves the whole microgrid.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we could integrate into our studies if they want to implement. So, for example, if let's just say there was a forecast algorithm for this is what the load is, this is what the solar is, it's not sufficient for us to say there's a forecast algorithm, therefore the load profile or the solar profile that we feed into it is 100% accurate. We need to model what the forecast algorithm operates to see the discrepancies and how it would react, just to say this is how the system will operate. Or if, let's just say, for example, these are the considerations of, or let's just say we implement it and then what you're proposing is a viable solution, we could say, hey, this is a viable solution that could resolve the challenges that you're facing as an option. Not, let's design a system from scratch. That has not been our role on these projects. So we haven't dealt with that. We haven't implemented it, but we would approach it as, we have found this solution that could be viable here. Another thing is, the more complex the implementation, the more challenging it is to operate and maintain.
Yeah.
A lot of the microgrid controls, like I did my PhD, 10 years ago. Oh, yeah, a long time ago. But I used an optimization engine to find the economic dispatch of all the resources. That hasn't been implemented in any of the microgrid systems that I've worked on. It's all rule-based systems that could be implemented in a programmable logic controller, because that way it could be fixed in the field by a technician. There's an understanding of how it operates. There's no need for worrying about whether or not it will converge on time. And also the systems that I did are time-based. So every hour it does a new dispatch, as opposed to in the real world, it's event-based. So the state of charge reaches a certain amount, the solar reaches a certain amount. So we have to understand that the solutions that are being presented, there's always risk in integrating that, and the solutions need to identify the risk mitigation strategies on a successful implementation.
And there were a lot of, it was a dense presentation, so I couldn't get everything. So I would be able to share it.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to share these slides with everyone. And I mentioned before that we have an electric thermal storage report as well. Just let me know if you want me to share that with you.
There were a lot of details, so if I had any question, I could use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was interesting.
Yeah, thank you. No, actually, how do I? We haven't yet, because we haven't been in the testing phase of novel technologies for northern applications. We have done, like I said, the electric thermal storage study project. But no, that isn't something that we have done yet. When I was working at the Hydro-Quebec Research Institute, yes, we have done quite a bit of that, but not in my current role. No other questions? All right, thank you.